Our second reader, reader number 2 at Tuesday Fun, hails from Charleston, South Carolina, den of the Southern Rebellion. Influenced by the city's duality, he made some interesting decisions, which started with attending the college founded after a slave revolt that also holds the dubious distinction of producing the 2 cadets who fired the first shots of the Civil War. An English major as an undergrad, he spent most of a decade in the Marine Corps, earning an MA in English literature in the process. Again, duality. Please please join me in welcoming Norman Doucet.
So thanks to Andrew and Bill, and thanks everyone for coming. I am not a writer, but I just wrote a story of what actually happened to me in my life. So I hope you enjoy it. It started out as a small thing, and I think I'm going to finish it. It's almost done, but this is the first part of the story, so I hope you guys enjoy. I was a good child. No, I was a great child. Well, I was an only child, so perhaps my mother's recollection of my youthful magnificence is a bit overstated. In my defense, however, I was pretty awesome. Straight A student, personable, that means I wasn't a nerd, musically talented, creatively gifted, athletic, and if I must say, pretty good looking, which translates naturally into the fact that I was good with the ladies. One could attribute the norm total package to the Catholic nuns who drilled me mercilessly in grammar school, perfecting my arithmetic, grammatical, and informational recitation skills while simultaneously imparting on me, through the skillful application of violence, the importance of obedience. One could also attribute my performance to the myriad teachers, mentors, family members, and friends who recognized my potential and pushed me, whether it be academically or otherwise, to not just reach for my goals, but to secure them through tenacious planning and flawless execution. The person to whom the bulk of the credit goes, however, is my mother. She is the one who molded and shaped me, who emphasized again and again that I had to be not just good, but perfect. To be good was a losing proposition, since some other child who was also good would invariably get my spot. I had to be perfect. That way, they had no choice but to recognize me. They could use no excuses because they couldn't get away with that anymore. We had fought to ensure that we couldn't be overlooked, but only if we were perfect. My mother is a Southerner. I suppose that you expected me to say that my mother is a racist, but I have concluded that she is not. Certainly, some of her behavior suggests that in fact she is a racist. She doesn't seem to like the general category of white people. Their culture, their looks, their attitudes, their advantage, their history. For instance, like most mothers, she was curious about my dating life. Very curious. When I was in college, we used to talk several times a week on the phone, and she would always ask if I was dating anyone, where she went to school, what she wanted to do for a living, and would always ask, very politely near the end of the conversation, "What does she look like, sweetie?" What she meant, of course, was, "Is she white?" I often didn't take the bait, which would end up in her lecturing me about the perils of the white girl, how they just wanted to take from you, and that they would abandon you when times were rough. The last thing she always asked before the call ended was, "How's Marcel doing, baby? And how's his mother?" This would always make me laugh. Marcel, my childhood best friend whom I met at the age of 6, is white. We were practically raised in each other's homes. My mother used to constantly remind me that I was a finicky eater, and God bless Marcel because he ate everything my mother cooked. His mother is considered to be my second mother, and mine his. She worried about him as much as she worried about me when we were young. So a casual observer might think, what the hell? Well, my mother is a Southerner. She, like the South, is an anachronism wrapped in an enigma topped by internal conflict. Born and raised in the segregated South, my mother was an active civil rights participant. She helped organize the successful boycotts of several segregated stores in Charleston, and even once marched with Dr. Martin Luther King in Atlanta. She harbors a deep-seated hatred of those responsible for segregation and what they did to maintain it. Until I was born, she lived in an all-black neighborhood surrounded by her own culture. She immediately fell in love with my father when she met him, but was hesitant to get involved with him because he was really light-skinned, which meant he had white people somewhere in his family lineage, and she thought it would send the wrong signal to her family and friends. In her own words, she wanted nothing to do with white people. Then I came along and she turned me into the whitest person that my black friends, whom I met at the ripe old age of 27, had ever met. That is correct. I was 27 when I made my first black friends. I think that they befriended me out of pity or fascination, but none of them would admit that today. How did this happen? My mother succinctly put it this way one time. You weren't going to amount to anything if I'd kept you in an all-black neighborhood with all-black schools. You needed exposure to the real world, and the real world is more than just black and white. While this is true, in the South of my youth, it was really all about black and white in many people's minds. Black meant rejection and dead end. White meant acceptance and opportunity. My mom chose white for me. Her initial strategy was to ensure that I thrived in their world while holding my culture near and dear to my heart. As she embarked upon this plan, enrolling me in Catholic school, moving us to a neighborhood where we were the only African Americans, forbidding me how to learn to play basketball, enforcing a very strict personal dress code, shutting down her racially charged rhetoric in favor of pushing me to individually excel, she didn't realize two things. First, that she was secretly embracing her new lifestyle, and second, she was causing me to reject my own culture, might I say my own skin color. There were signs. For instance, my fascination with Michael Jackson, stay with me people, post Off the Wall album, and in the beginning of the Thriller era. This combined with the movie Grease, no explanation there, is where my desire for the Jerry curl originated. I wanted the plastic surgery too, but the Jerry curl was all we could afford. In my mind, Michael had clearly figured out the best way to assimilate. Look more white! And I wanted to follow in his footsteps. My mom shrugged it off as Michael Jackson mania. When I brought home Metallica's And Justice for All album and played it for my mom, she initially said, and I quote, "Boy, turn that fucking devil music off." But a couple of minutes later, she returned and said, "Let me hear that again." She listened intently after a minute or two and said, "I see why you like it. The guitar riffs are complex." My father, by the way, is a guitar player. My mom hates heavy metal to this day. The few times she heard hip-hop from my tape player, yes, my tape player, she would lose it literally and figuratively. Her standard line was, "You're not going to learn anything from people whose only talent is singing and dancing." Rap music wasn't allowed. My mother did listen to Motown, but never in my presence. I would always be in my room when she turned it on, and I would not be allowed to join her. She would say that when she turned on the record player, that was mommy's personal time. She completely cut me off from anything that was quote unquote black. She thought it was the surest way to ensure my success. Perhaps she was right, but the child she created turned out to be a bit of a racist himself. For instance, as a Marine Corps infantry commander, I always made it a point to hang a portrait of Robert E. Lee in my office. This achieved three things for me in my own mind. First, it demonstrated that I appreciated military excellence, as General Lee embodies the martial principles of audacity, economy of force, discipline, and the empowering of subordinates. Second, it sent a message to all of the African American Marines that I wasn't going to play favorites. Black infantry officers are a rarity in the Marine Corps. I was one of two in a division of about 19,000 Marines, of which there are about 1,200 officers. This made sense, since in the immortal words of one of our previous commandants, quote, "Black officers can't shoot, swim, or navigate very well, so they don't go into the infantry." And yes, he actually said that in a 60 Minutes interview. He did. The black enlisted Marines knew this, and I wanted to underscore that I would be fair and balanced. They had to pull their weight just like everyone else. The Marine Corps wasn't a place that gave handouts. Lastly, I thought it would make a good impression with my superiors. As I said, black infantry officers are a rarity. I wanted to send a clear signal to the bosses that I was on board and that I was a team player. This little trick always worked. I instantly became one of the boys and part of the inner circle. I was given the tough assignments and best jobs because I was indeed the best. I lived a single infantry officer frat boy lifestyle. Rock music, toga parties, keg stands, loose women, jumping out of airplanes, getting to shoot bad guys, and blowing shit up. We combat arms officers held POGs, people other than grunts, in complete disdain. Grunts is a term for the infantry, but extends to all combat arms in modern times. In the Marine Corps, the overwhelming majority of black officers were POGs. There wasn't a need to hang out with other black officers because they weren't really important. There weren't many of them around, not to mention the fact that they listened to rap music. Fucking POGs. At the end of my first tour of duty, I wanted to join the ceremonial unit in Washington, D.C., but my commander at the time thought it would be more impactful if I went to a training unit, so he sent someone else. I didn't want to go to a training unit, partly because training units, of which Parris Island was one, were filled with POGs. Also, Parris Island was in South Carolina, and at this point in my life, I kind of hated South Carolina. But you go where you're sent, so off I went into the den of POGs and nasty 18-year-old kids trying to be like the Marines I had just led in combat months earlier. And that's where the story gets interesting. By now, I was firmly entrenched in my lifestyle and beliefs. My goal was to get down there, do my thing, and be number one. There were some problems with this scenario. First, Parris Island was filled with POG officers. Second, Parris Island was filled with African American officers. I was amazed at how many black officers there were. I'd never seen more than one or two every now and again in the regular service. Here, there were 2 or 3 per unit. Third, Parris Island was almost devoid of combat arms officers. This demographic mix created a special paradigm. You see, combat arms officers hold non-combat arms officers, POGs, in disregard, creating a reactionary disdain for combat arms officers among the POGs. In the absence of that first and strongest bonding quality in the Marine Corps, which is unit, comprised of Marines in the same occupational specialty or job, the officers at Parris Island invariably fell to the second strongest bonding quality, culture. As a result, I was out with the black officers because of culture and out with the white officers because of my job. Bam, instant pariah. It was the first time in a long time that I was on the outside looking in, and I didn't like it. In the first 3 months of my time there, I had no friends. The work days were hot and long, and time off was precious. The officers in my training unit would talk about how much fun they had going to this bar, that party, the barbecue at Smith's place, that was just awesome, and the girls they met. They'd invite each other out for the weekend in front of me, and it must have given them a sense of perverted pleasure. In short, I was miserable. The officer's job at Parris Island is basically to ensure that drill instructors don't kill recruits. So we did a lot of standing. I mean, a lot. Like 95% of the day. Not saying anything, not doing anything, just fucking standing. So there I was, standing in 100-degree heat some afternoon in July, watching recruits running and climbing obstacles while drill instructors fiercely yell at them to move faster, jump higher, pull their heads out of their asses, etc. And a guy walked up to me, stuck out his hand, and said 2 fateful words. Nick Black. That introduction to tell you a little bit about my good friend of the past 16 years. He's an alpha male, confident, smart, ambitious, and good looking. We actually look a lot alike. His 2-year-old son is often amusingly confused when Nick and I are together, which is, as it turns out, why he introduced himself to me in the first place. Nick was also new to Parris Island. He had been there a week and was on his quote-unquote introductory tour. Nick was great at the same things I was, with one exception. He was a real black guy. He had attended an HBC, historically black college, was president of his fraternity, black fraternity, was a Freemason, and had black friends. The very first question Marine officers ask each other is what their role or major job is. We exchange this information. Nick, supply officer, POG. Norm, infantry officer. Get the fuck out of here. Seriously? Yep, seriously. The regiment has to meet you. What regiment, I asked, slightly confused. You know, the regiment, the group of brothers at Parris Island that hang. This was news to me. I knew of no such organization. We're having a barbecue Saturday afternoon. My crib. You need to drop by. I said, sure thing. To which he chuckled and asked, where are you from? Charleston, I told him. You don't have a southern accent, he responded, his grin widening. The nuns beat it out of me. They sure did, dude. His smile was revealing all of his teeth at this point. The dude told me that what he really meant was that I sounded like a white guy. But he didn't rescind his invitation, so I guess he wasn't too put off. I was very nervous about this gathering of the regiment. It would be filled with people that had known me for 3 months and hadn't extended an invitation. Nick had been here for 1 week and apparently was already in. Moreover, he had surely known that I was not in. This guy had balls, I thought. What I didn't know is that Nick had been at bat for me with the group before I had even met him. 2 of my other good friends today had actually shot down the idea of inviting me to the group, but Nick had won them over. He told them that regardless of what my MOS was, my job, or what picture hung on my office, I was still a black officer and therefore entitled to be a part of the group. There had been shrugs and therefore tacit approval of me joining them, at least for this one barbecue. As I walked up to Nick's apartment that Saturday afternoon, I was surrounded by the sounds and smells of things foreign to me. A lump rose in my throat as I contemplated the impending humiliation I was about to suffer at the hands of hostile black folks who probably looked at me as an Uncle Tom. I could see some of the group in the backyard through the screen door. Based on the loud voices and hand and arm gestures, I could tell one of them was in the middle of telling a story and the others were calling him out on his bullshit. This was a common practice in my old infantry unit, the telling of outrageous stories and trying to convince your friends of their veracity while they cheerfully protested. But these were pogues who don't do anything. What stories could they possibly be telling? Some massive rash of paper cuts across the base? Moreover, these were black guys, and I had no idea what stories they told each other. Either way, I'd find out shortly. I stood for a second longer contemplating my entry plan, as any good infantry officer does, but then abandoned the thought. I had no clue what to do. I've just got to get in there and get out with my dignity intact, I told myself. I rang the doorbell. I saw Nick jogging to the door. Here we go, I whispered under my breath. Here we go. Thank you.